Welcome to the 34th episode of the Animal Riot Podcast, brought to you by Animal Riot Press, a literary press for books that matter. It's your producer, Katie, here, and this episode has been edited to reflect our new name. If you're new to the Animal Riot community, welcome, and you can find out more about us at animalriotpress.com. Now on to the episode with your host, Brian Birnbaum, and today's guest, Manda.
I'm your host, Brian Birnbaum. I'm here today to welcome back Manda. Meher is a poet, short story writer, culture critic, and educator from Mumbai, India, based in New York City. She earned her MFA from the College of New Rochelle, where she founded the Canopy Review. She is the co-founder and co-host of an angry reading series in Harlem and the author of Busted Models, perhaps the greatest title of anything ever made, a chapbook of poems from No Deer magazine. And yeah, it also looks awesome. I gotta add that too. And before we get started, I'm going to say today's brand of fuckery is brought to you by the cake left over from the magnificent launch party. Thank you, Katie, for putting on the greatest party that has ever been partied. And a little story about the cake. It has a picture of me like keeling over. And it had, yes. And it kind of looked like I peed my pants in the picture. It was kind of funny. So we originally wanted the novel cover for Emerald City on it, but Wegmans, we got the cake from Wegmans, which is hilarious. They called and said that there was a copyright issue, and we said no, that's impossible because we own the rights to this book, and so we demanded like yuppies demanded to speak to the manager. And we're not yuppies, we're poor. We demanded to speak to the manager, and they got on the phone and said, no, we just don't want to print a cake that has a gun and a joint on it. We were like, all right, fair enough. And I was like, yeah, we should take this to the Supreme Court, avenge for the Supreme Court ruling that did not go in our favor, in our opinion. And also, furthermore, Meher, were you the first one to cut out the cake? But no, you cut out my crotch.
Yeah, I'm a little shameless. I'm not that shameless.
Yeah.
I circled the cake multiple times.
Were you ordered to, or did you just do it on your own volition?
No, so I circled the cake several times. And she kept saying, Katie, who is the greatest party organizer of making things happen.
Yes.
That was a baller publication day party, press launch.
Thank you.
All that fun stuff.
Thank you, Katie.
Kept saying, eat cake, eat cake, eat cake. So I circled the cake, but nobody cut it. And I realized that there are processes to these things, and I didn't want to be the initiator of such processes, so I kept walking back to my station or wherever people were, hoping that somebody cut the cake. And then finally, Chelsea comes to me bearing a small piece of cake. So I'm just like, okay, this is my chance. And then I go, and then I realized just on the spot that I want the crotch. And Katie...
So Chelsea did it.
Maybe she did. Maybe she cut the cake.
It sounds like she did.
And then I said I wanted the crotch. Katie very generously offered, as all good partners do, offered her partner's crotch to me on my plate. I
feel very uncomfortable. There's a lot of jokes coming in my head that are going to ruin my reputation that I'm not going to say. Okay, I will. Okay, let's end this. Cake, as Jay-Z would say. Oh, yeah. Apparently you told my mom that
a lot of fun
my
things
crotch.
happened. I took the crotch. I convinced the next person who came for the piece to take your head. And then all that were left were your feet. So the whole cake was intact, save for one side piece, but your, bust and crotch were butchered out. And then your mother was close by, and this other lady, whom I don't know, was close by, and she signed off to your mother that you were missing from the cake, that you'd been cut off. So then your mother had, she covered her mouth. She was like horrified, but like slightly... amused, horrified, and she looked at me, and I pointed.
Maybe mortified.
Yeah. And then I pointed to my crotch and pointed to the plate to say that your crotch was on my plate. And so this lady, who was the communicator, comes by, and I say, take the legs.
Literally lost in translation.
Yeah, I'm just like, take the legs, because those were the only thing left. So she's like, fine. So she took your legs. Yeah. And that's how we cut you off that cake.
It's beautiful.
It's very beautiful. Macabre, and it's very in tone with your novel.
It is. Yeah. It's exactly how I wanted it to be, I think. And the interpreter for my parents that night has worked for Michelle at CWP before, she told me. And she used to work for my dad back in the day.
Hey.
So it's all full circle. I guess, or it's like a
serendipitous offering.
Yeah, or something. It's a curved shape. Let's move on. So yeah, we're here to talk about debut books or chapbooks in your case. Do you want to talk a little bit about your chapbook?
Sure.
Let's do that.
This book is called Busted Models.
Yeah, which is, again, the greatest title for
Thank
anything
you.
ever made.
Fun fact. Nobody knows this. It is the title of the first ever short story that I wrote in my first semester of the MFA program.
Ah, so you recycled a title. I see.
Yeah. It's a title that I thought was really stupid at the time until the story got workshopped and everybody's like, this is a great title. And I thought, okay, cool. So this is apparently a good title. So I'm going to hold on to it. That story itself lost its favor with me. I love the story. The writing has lost its favor with me. So it's a story that I need to repurpose and rewrite entirely at some point. So I, meanwhile, have been working on a larger poetry collection, which is titled Some of Many Women. And I've been working on it for about 1.5 years, 2 years almost, and that's sort of taken over my life. And I knew that, given the nature of poetry publishing as is, it's hard to sort of get your foot in the door and get your stuff out there organically. Like just getting your first book is, if it's not through a first book award, it's a little tricky. And I realized a chapbook would be a great way for me to get something out there and also to, to acknowledge that a larger work exists behind it as a backbone. So I sent out a few chapbook submissions and I needed a title and obviously couldn't use the main book title. And I thought about it and I read through the poems that I chose for the chapbook submission. And I realized all of them, like the larger collection too, but all of them in particular have a great irreverence to higher authority.
Okay.
There's a lot of, they defy higher authority, they critique higher authority, and they also challenge the concept of authority. And the title from the short story just came back to me, because the idea of busted models is just... The foundational idea of that story was also that, the elders don't know what the fuck they're doing, And this concept came back to me while I was reading this poems. And I was like, yeah, it's my title. I can take it, put it wherever the fuck I want. Who cares? So I did that. And that's how it came to be called Busted Models. I sent it over to a few places, like as a sort of a test drive. And No Dear Magazine got back to me sometime around March of this year or April, and they said they would like to publish it, which was very exciting. For the listeners who don't know, No Dear Magazine, they're a independent, chapbook publishing press. They put out, poetry journals, and they also do debut chapbooks of poets. They did Marva Halal's, they've done a bunch of chapbooks, most notably Marva Halal's debut chapbook, and they're run by the very spirited Emily Brand, who's brilliant, who's amazing, and a great team of editors, and they just have a very inclusive voice in terms of the kind of work they put out. So I was very excited to join that coterie of writers.
Take notes, everyone.
Yeah,
there's a lot of juice here.
Juice, yeah. I was very excited to join the coterie of those writers.
Or cabal. If we're talking about irreverence here,
Hey.
A little seditious.
And so No Dear does a sort of a chapbook series every year. They put out 4 chapbooks within a season. And all those 4 chapbooks have a theme. And that theme sort of is dedicated to, I would imagine, the choosing of the chapbooks, but also the cover. So all 4 of them have the same cover, with, of course, the names and titles appropriated to the specific author. So this specific series is called Archival and Remembrance. And the cover is this brilliant... The best way to describe it is that it looks like one of those vintage library checkout cards.
Yeah. The cover
dates.
is fucking... just fire. I love it so much. Yeah.
It's gorgeous. When I saw it,
and
I was like,
it's so like quaint, and yet like not in some like conservative way quaint.
Yeah.
Like it's quaint in a way that's just like very like I don't know, like blue stocking sort of like just bookish way. I don't know. I just love it.
And I also love the fact that it's so, when in poetry, especially, you talk about, because there's so many forms of poetic writing that exist.
Well, we should real quick. I just want to say before you get into that, where can we buy this so people can look at the cover and then buy it after they see the cover?
Yeah, on No Dear Magazine's website, it's
Yeah.
available for $12, and I believe it comes up to $15 if you order it online with the delivery charges and stuff. I believe that No Dear also puts up copies of the book at a few indie bookstores in the city.
Okay.
But I don't have the complete information about that yet. So
Maybe we can add that after.
yeah,
or something
and
like that.
you can also come over to my website. It'll be redirected from my website's writing page, so it's also listed there.
Meher Manda writer is
Unfortunately, it's not that cute. It's it's meherwrites.wordpress.com.
beautiful. That's cute.
I lost mehermanda.wordpress.com due to a silly mistake, so
Okay.
it's dead. WordPress won't let me have it.
R.I.P. So you were saying?
Yeah, so in poetry, you want to choose a form that fuses imagination with content. You want you don't want to write something as a prose poem just because, or you don't want to write something as a the haiku just because. You want that to be married to what you're trying to say. And I feel like this cover does that. It marries the theme of archival and remembrance to like making it a collective voice, the 4 chapbooks, and I think that's what I love about it. That's not a gimmicky cover.
And in a more lowbrow way, I'm just gonna do some death of the author kind of shit and say this is how I see it. It kind of feels like you're stealing a library card.
Yeah.
Which is pretty irreverent. So, or a book maybe, I don't know, something like that. You get what I'm saying? But yeah, so I heard you read some of it at your launch.
Yeah.
And your incredible grasp of the English language is, itself is worthy of purchase. I'm just going to say
very
that
exciting
right there.
coming from you.
Well, wow. That's flattering.
No,
Thank
you
you.
have a very incredible vocabulary, so it's like,
I would say I know a lot of words, but how to use them is another story all itself, so to speak, I do think it's really important. I mean, sometimes at points, and this is how I know you're a poet, because sometimes at points, because your poems can be dense in a way that's not turgid and pretentious, like dense in a way that there's so much packed into like every line in the most like poetic way possible. That's the point of poetry sometimes, is to be very economic with your words. But like at some points, like because the syllabics or like the belletristic quality of it, I would just kind of get lost in like the just the oral atmosphere of it. You know what I mean? Which like kind of feels like I'm cheating it, just because I know the purpose of your poems are so much more about the content than the way they sound. There is a sort of poetry out there that like at its worst form becomes like a word salad that's like basically got this quote unquote nominal belletristic quality. Like, it sounds pretty, whatever, off the tongue, so to speak. But like, I don't know if it's the way you read it, but yeah, I was just like, wow, I can't even read like that. Like, like I feel like such a shit reader compared to you.
I heard you read last night. You can read very
Maybe
very
it was because
well.
I was reading someone. I will say right now that last night at the launch party, I didn't read from my book, which was really fun because I got to read from an incarcerated writer. I hate the fact that I hate the phrasing of all this. Like I wish there was a way to just say a person who writes who was in prison, but that sounds just weird. But anyways, this dude St. James, who was in this bluegrass band, St. James Harris Wood. He was in this bluegrass band. He got addicted to heroin and like found himself in jail. That whole story. The prison industrial complex treats addicts like criminals, unfortunately. But I won't judge. I don't know where this guy's been, blah blah blah, but his writing's fire, and like I hate to say it, but like I've become so much of a better reader, but it was somewhat easier to read someone else's stuff. There was a less self-conscious aspect to it, and I was so enthused about his stuff that I was like, I could really get into it. You know what I mean? I don't know.
It's always I think the way I think is I don't see people necessarily as good readers and good writers and bad readers but good writers or in that space. I always think that how do you take to a word? I'm just very seduced by people who can speak a word in a way that other people can't speak it.
Yeah.
And that could be speaking it to paper or speaking it to an audience, but who can just hold a word and take its cadence and translate it into a larger meaning. So to me, it was irrelevant that, whether you were reading your own work or somebody else's, because yes, it was a writer who does not have the access to come into a literary space and present his own work. But at the same time, you had animated the story for me. And I was hanging on to every word. I was hanging on to and which is tricky, especially with prose, because, you're reading a lot, you're listening to the same voice. It's very easy to get, get caught up and lose yourself.
And everyone remembers what's around them is more alcohol and pizza and cake.
Yeah.
So
and you want to, But
yeah.
to me, I was just so, and I realized that that's the mark of a good. I hate the word wordsmith because it's so pedantic and it's kind of cheap. But I think the idea of a good purveyor of words, and that if you can translate a word and animate it with a lot of meaning, whether it's your own or somebody else's.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is just like buying in, which is what I appreciated about your reading is like I really admire, like, I think it's so important, and I'm working on this, but to like buy into your own stuff. Like, you wrote this, and like I am proud of the book I wrote. Like, I worked on Emerald City for 6 years and I did my best. Like, I put out the best thing I could, and yet I'm still like I'm like 92% there, but like there's a couple moments where I find myself reading and I realize myself, and there's that self-consciousness in the back of my head where I'm like, are they enjoying this? And then I like kind of come out of it just a little bit, and I'm like not the character anymore or something like that, And I'm getting better, but I know exactly what you mean. There's so many different ways to like own a word. And like you got people like, we've had Aaron Puchigian on this podcast, who's one of the best readers I've ever seen in my life.
He's a great reader.
And it's like, but that's like the exhibitionist sort. And exhibitionist is a bad word. That has like
performative.
Performative.
In a good way.
That has like a pejorative aspect to it.
Yeah.
It's not, because it's beautiful. And then you have like someone like David Foster Wallace, who's reading this like hyper intelligent like shit in a really like shy way, and everyone in the crowd's just like cracking up because it's like so funny, and he like doesn't break. Like,
David Sedaris also does that.
Yeah,
it's
right.
Very, like,
and then you have someone like Zadie Smith, who's like very stoic, and reads with this like kind of like elegant cadence, and there's just so many different ways to read, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like, it's just, I appreciate all of those forms, they're all really beautiful.
When I teach poetry to my students, because they all, especially undergraduates, are fed all of, the slam, visually performative, arresting videos, and they come in with that idea of poetry reading. So the first video I always show them is Suhair Ahmad's, I think it's the poem's called 9/11 Blues or Post-9. It was a post-9/11 poem. And Suhair Ahmad is Arab. And this poem was also about, as a New Yorker, knowing that moment, the moment of 9/11, shifted everybody's lives forever, but also the lives of her own brothers who were fighting for America in the armed forces. But knowing that as Muslim men, their lives get shifted in a way.
Right.
And if you see that reading, there's a lot of a video of that. There's a lot of tension in the space, and she's reading it in a very, like you said, not stoic, but very, subdued. It's arresting, but it's controlled. It's, it's retained to a common core of a voice. And she lets her sort of nimble voice just carry the poem through. There's no hand movements. There's no, extravagant performativity as the situation in the poem demands. And that's what I ask of my students, in that reading is such a frightening and terrifying aspect and reality of our desire to write and present our work to the world.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be. That if you're not that person who's a natural extrovert, who takes to the stage very naturally, the reading doesn't have to be that kind.
You can be yourself.
You can be yourself.
Yeah.
All you have to do is read slowly and be clear.
Yeah.
Be audible. And take your pauses. A pause makes and breaks a reading.
Yeah.
It's true. You like that moment when you're supposed to let a word hang in the air. When you know that this enjambment means that I wait for a response and then move on. Or when your voice is slightly supposed to rise or slightly supposed to speed up. Just knowing those little intimacies with the text.
Yeah, I had no grasp of that. I was so terrified when I first started reading. I was trying to speed up at points, and I would stumble over words, and I was just trying to get through it because I was so fucking nervous. Like it was just a disaster. And like now I'm at the point where I'm still not as good as I would like to be, but I'm better. Thank you. I appreciate that very much. Because especially because Katie over here, literally when I first started reading was like, yeah, you suck. And I needed to hear that because like I did. It is something that like, yeah, you do have to just get up and practice too. Like at some point it is a performance to a certain degree. And even though like you should just be yourself, it does, just like growing up and going through puberty and finding your identity or whatever cliche bullshit, whatever platitude is there. It's like, you do got to kind of just get up and do it. But I do want to ask you something real about, and I won't just kick the can down the road on this one, like, because I'll answer to this too. But something that you mentioned about how bringing you back to like, a debut work coming out, this chapbook, and you said like how great that night was, but then you felt like it's like almost like it ended, and then you were like, oh, I felt nothing. Like, after that night ended or something or whatever it is. It's like, and I think that's common. Like, I remember even before, like, the launch party or something, when I knew the book was done, it's like people would be asking me, like, how do you feel? How does it feel that it's coming out? And I would just be like, in the back of my head, it's like, I just want to write another one, like, or something like that. But, like, I don't know. I want to hear how you feel about, like, what is that like for you?
Also with the awareness that yours is a, full-length book, and mine is still a chapbook. Not in any way to trivialize a chapbook, but with an awareness that a chapbook does not contain the full breadth of what this subject matter was dealing with.
Yeah, it's part, and it is actually part of a larger whole.
It is part of a larger whole, larger mosaic. But I always imagined, because to write and publish something that has my name on the cover was such a... Call it masturbatory, was such a dream for the longest time, as it is for every writer.
Yeah.
It's been a obsession.
I read that in the prison writers that I like communicate with, like they all say the same thing. It's like they want to be known. Mm-hmm. They want to be seen. They want to like have their name on something, I respect
writers a lot who are all about the process and not about, what happens after
whatever you want to call it.
Glory is
that was just an operational term.
Just like having a name on something doesn't necessarily signify glory, but it also feels like it's like
accomplishment, whatever you want to call it,
Yeah, and I don't want to make it seem like writers are in any way, just that it trivializes the pursuit of craft for feeling that way, because that's a scientist.
We're vain too.
Scientists in a laboratory are vain. If they're working on an experiment, they want the results.
But I also wanted to just bring it up because like we're not psychopaths for
we're wanting our name.
No, and also
not marking our territory like dogs.
On the other hand, like psychopaths like kill people and don't feel anything. Like we're not psychopaths like because like we publish something and then like that feeling is just like, wait, where's that feeling that I thought was going to be there? It's like for me it was that realization that like, oh yeah, I really do this because I love doing it. I don't do this because like, and I brought, like when we were talking earlier, I brought up everyone has to go through the Siddhartha journey. Mm-hmm. It's like, you do have to go through it. And I do think it propels you to write that first thing is like that idea that you're going to publish it. And it's important. Like that ego aspect is important. And it still is important even after you publish that first thing. Like you're a human, like you have to address the ego and maybe you have to like tame it or something. But like, yeah, there is that realization once you publish something that like nothing's changing. You finish this thing and you're gonna know some more people. Like you're gonna know a few more people, and that's what's great about it, really.
Which
like
is
you're gonna know a few more people.
I think architects don't sit in their little room and make like elaborate floor plans to never want those floor plans to become a real building. They want a building.
Yeah, what would be exactly.
They do not just want to sit there and like draw art. And I can imagine that the day the building is launched or whatever the thing for a building's version of book launch is,
the ribbon cutting. Yeah, whatever the fuck they do these days.
When that happens, when you've worked on it so hard, but they get like a celebrity to cut the ribbon or a politician, and you're like, I'm sure that feeling, there is a disjointed feeling. But I imagine that a month later, when they walk down that street, and they're like, that's my building. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I see it there. Mm-hmm. And to me, I think that night, because my book was being celebrated, and all my dear friends were there. People who've supported this work, people who've supported me in any way were there, and they wanted to celebrate it. It's also the idea that this is too much. Maybe this is not even worth it. There's also that at the back of your head. And then you hold the book, you don't really feel anything. You're like, whatever. But I have to tell you this. This is something you don't know. After I told you that I didn't feel anything about the book, and I was just like, whatever.
There's always another thing.
There's always another thing. I've been at Harshal's, and Harshal's copy, because he'd pre-ordered, and his copy came in. And the package was like next to me on the living room. I was sitting at the couch, I was doing something, and so I open it to see, and then I look at it, and then I read the first poem, and then I read the second poem, and I read the third poem, and then I read the whole book. I mean, it's a chapbook. It's only like 25 pages. So I read the whole book. And I had this very strange moment at this particular poem where I kind of choked up. And I realized, wow, this poem's good.
But that's where you remembered why you did it,
Yeah.
Because like it's not like the exhibition of it or like, any of that that vanity, it's not going to fill you up. It's when you read it again and you're like, and that's why readings are cool. Like when you got to do the reading, it's like, you're like, wow, like, like I am actually proud of this.
Yeah.
I think it adds value. I think this is why people are here. This is why they're talking to me right now. You know what I mean? That was at the launch party last night, that's when I felt good. Like we were talking before when I had to like kind of shift and like it felt like I wasn't able to treat people like human beings because like everyone wanted my attention at certain points. Like that felt shitty. But like the fact when I had conversations about how they felt about it, the people that had read it and stuff like that, like, that feels really good,
Yeah, I can totally imagine you 2 months from now working on your next novel, Katie's at work, you're just sitting there, and then you spot your book across the room on top of your shelf. And there'll be that moment where and there's nobody else in that moment. There are no reviews in that moment. There's nobody listening and clapping. There are no lights. There are no photographs. There are no videos. There's no Instagrams. And nobody will capture it. You will just look at your own book and you will think, damn. Like, it's like your baby. You built it.
I will say, no, you're very right. And I will say I brought an arc with me when I went to rehab because at that point, I had never been lower in my life. And I brought an arc in with me because I was like, at least I've done this. And it was like my little like talisman, like I could just like touch it and like be there. And then when people when I told people I was a writer in there, people were like, damn, like that's crazy. You're a drug addict and you fucking wrote a book. Like,
You were like, ever heard of Dennis Johnson? Or like countless other people.
It was strange because I was like, they had all these photographs on the wall of like celebrity addicts. And I was like,
fun.
Yeah, no, it was cool.
Did they put yours up?
Are you fucking kidding me? That's a ridiculous question.
You're a celebrity author. You have a book out. You've got reviews.
No, we're talking about like Anthony Kiedis level celebrity. You know what I mean? Like
how many people are Anthony Kiedis level?
But quite a few.
I mean, like...
there's a lot of them out there.
Yeah.
We got the Amy Winehouses and
Heath
the Brittany
Ledger.
Murphys and, all these people. But yeah, anyway, should we do a reading?
Listen, if it was my rehab, I'd put your photo up there.
Oh, wow. That's really flattering.
But like, this author was with us.
And also, I have to say that, at that point when I look over and Katie's at work and I see my book, I'm going to get a text from Katie being like, what the fuck are you doing? What the fuck are you doing staring at your book? Do something. Read David's book.
As is the natural course of literature.
Yeah.
Move on to the next thing.
And I am very, as I was talking to you about before, I am very excited because I'm for the first time in years, I'm working on a short story. I've like really never been that big into short fiction. I'm writing
Fantastic.
I'm writing a short story. I've got a couple essays in mind, but I've published a bunch of essays and like I've done that and I still love it. I love that I've discovered nonfiction, but yeah, it's crazy. Like and I don't think I would be doing it if it wasn't for the fact that I'm like, okay, I've been published. Like, you have to walk that Siddhartha path and know that, like, that goal, that's sort of an illusion, but isn't. Like, it's the only thing that's going to get you to that sort of equilibrium, so to speak. Like, you got to walk it. And now I'm like, oh, I can just write a short story and, like, live longer. And then I'll start my novel at another point. Like, I don't know.
This reminds me of that I was rereading Salman Rushdie's Joseph Anton,
which you...
I can't stop raving about
I know.
it.
You need
I can't stop raving about him.
I know. I need to read him so you'll stop like
talking
fucking
about
nagging me about reading him.
Salman Rushdie is my David Foster Wallace.
And no, here's some real like synchronicity or, you know, fate, determinism, whatever you want to call it, like whatever you believe in, the God of your own understanding.
None.
Like after you told me to read him, and then my friend Jake, whom I thanked at the party last night, like, and I sent him that video, and he was so happy. Like he'd been texting like right after that. He was like, "Have you read this thing by Rushdie yet?" And I was like, "All right, the universe is speaking to me right now. I got to read this fucking dude." Like, you know.
So he writes in Joseph Anton because that's all about his fatwa years when the fatwa was imposed on him.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy had already won the Booker, and he'd already had, he had Shame, and then he had the Satanic Verses, which was a hit, which had been nominated for several awards. But then the fatwa happened. But through that entire time, he was writing. He was churning out books like a factory. I mean, not like a factory in that it was, brain dead operation, but it was he was constantly imagining what can my next story be. And it's particularly fascinating because this is a guy whose movement has been restricted. He can't move around. He can't access public spaces. So in many ways, this dials back to the Pen America partnership that all the reading series are doing, where we're featuring incarcerated writers, because that this idea of like, this is a guy, not to say that he was in a prison, but in that his movement was restricted, his freedom was restricted, and this guy was constantly at it. He churned out like 4 books in that 10 years. And I realized that that's what writers do. You sit, if there is glory, you love it, you'll take it, you sit in it, and then you move on, because like it doesn't feed you. The act of writing, the act of putting word to paper is what feeds you.
That's a very good way of putting it. There's no nourishment there.
No.
Yeah, it's not. It's like eating cake. We're still eating cake. We're still eating the leftover cake. Yeah, my hair's I've opted out because I've had a lot of leftover pizza.
Yeah.
And like honestly, I hate to make a judgment here, like especially about someone who was so sad and ended up ending their own lives. But like one of the failures I do see with that, perhaps a failure of DFWs, is that I think there was still always an element of like getting something at the end of the line there, and I remember someone writing about him at his launch party for Infinite Jest, and everyone was having a good time, and I think maybe his editor Michael Peach or something wrote this. I forget who it was, but he was like upstairs in a room just being like, is this it? And it's like, and then he didn't write, he couldn't finish The Pale King after that. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, I do think if you lose sight of the fact that like, this is it, like this is like, you either understand that like you're in flow, because this was another dude who was a recovering alcoholic, so he can relate, so. But yeah, I don't know. Should you read now? Should we do a reading? Or is there anything else you want to talk about a debut work, novel, chapbook, whatever you want to call it?
I think. A question that I would ask you is, there's this whole gestation period of writing a novel.
Yeah, that's one of the hardest parts.
Which is the hardest part, and there's this
the hardest part. Maybe the end is also very hard, but
and I think the whole process is, to be really honest. Even the day it gets launched, sure, you're overwhelmed, you're supported.
There's a sweet spot when you're drafting where it almost starts to feel easy. I would very much or not like overwhelmingly difficult is the better way to put it.
I think first draft is the most optimistic part of writing.
Yeah.
Because there's no hopes, no dreams, no, there is ambition, but there's no expectation.
Right.
And there's just pure, processing. It's just churning out. It's just letting the words or the story take over.
And you're just constantly discovering. It's beautiful. Yeah.
And then once you have the first draft down, everything after that is awful, because now suddenly you've prescribed an expectation based on that quality. And you think, okay, now we're fucked. Now we have to go from here to make it the best version that it can be.
For me, that process kind of starts itself over several times throughout the, I can't
even imagine.
Yeah, because like you get excited like in like a third draft. You're like, oh, like I got all this like narrative, blah blah blah, and then you hit that place where you got to fix it all again, and But anyway, you were saying, so in the gestation period, yes.
In the gestation period, And I asked this because it's funny you said you're working on a short story, because I've been bitten by the novel bug.
Ooh, this is exciting.
For the last month and a half. I don't know how much of that is the fact that I've been working on a poetry collection for 2 years, and I'm just sort of tired of writing poetry, of thinking poetry, of speaking poetry. And for some reason, maybe reading Rushdie and there's this story that refuses to leave, but it's not a fully formed story. It's the germ of something that could grow into something bigger. How do you reread your work and rephrase your work and reposition your work with kindness to yourself?
Ooh, wow, that's a really good question. I did not do that for my first novel. I was not kind to myself. I'll be, and Katie knows that more than anyone. Yeah, it was constant elation while I was writing, and then holy shit, there's so much fucked up that I want to fix, and it's I'm not gonna sit here and dramatize it as oh, I'm a piece of shit writer all the time. It did get to that point sometimes. I would sometimes be oh, I'm not worthy, and stuff like that. But it wasn't always like that. It was more am I cut out for this? Oh, I got this rejection from this agent or something, and it means that I'm not good enough, and this and that, and so I'm trying to bring it back to your question about the process itself. How to not do that. Because I do think that's important, because at some point when you're doing that, you have to have this paradox of the desire for perfection and the knowledge that you're never going to be perfect, that you need to reconcile that paradox, because if you don't, you are going to drive yourself insane. And I did drive myself insane. We all know that. I've told my story of where I've been in the last couple of months. I did drive myself insane. I did. And it's not all because of the book, but yeah, there was a lot of it there. Where it was I worked until 3-4 in the morning, and I did that using substances a lot, and it was a drive for perfection that was not healthy. It just wasn't. I think the best way I can answer that is that you have to be doing it to nourish the product and yourself, and how to do that is to be constantly focused on when you're sitting down, are you obsessing over something to the point where you feel that twitch in your head, and you're reading a line 100 times and you're not getting anywhere? Katie would see me doing that sometimes. At the end of a session, I'd literally be looking at the same sentence for I'm not kidding. It's at some points it would be 2 or 3 hours, and it's that's fucked up. You can't be doing that. You have to be able to separate yourself. So whether that's in a microcosm of a single writing session, and you're looking at a single line, or if it's more in a macro sense of I've only given myself one day, and I'm not really getting distance from this section I'm looking at, and I know there's something that I don't like about it. I really need to step away, maybe work on something else. And I'm trying to put this in a way that doesn't sound cliche and just be just be fucking chill about it, dude. Relax. Because we're never going to be like that. But at the same time, I really do mean that if you just got to keep in mind that if you think you're going to finish this tomorrow, you're just fucking kidding yourself, and you're doing it for the wrong reasons. I took 6 years on my novel, and maybe it even should have taken longer, because I killed myself doing it nearly, But, do it first in a way that's just consistent and healthy, and that you're taking care of yourself, and that you're not trying to finish it tomorrow. That's my only suggestion. That would be my mantra. Don't try to finish it tomorrow. Just work on something today, have a good time doing it, make sure you did the best you could that day, whether it's a sentence or 3,000 words. I don't know. I hope that's good advice. It sounds like really kind of amorphous, or maybe nebulous, and I don't even know if I can take that advice myself, because it's hard. I'll sit there and obsess afterwards. But Garth, one of my professors at Sarah Lawrence, he wrote City on Fire and everything. He literally said he wakes up in the morning, he writes, and then he does not think about it the rest of the day. Not at all. He just doesn't think about it. That's how he drafts, And I couldn't do that. I would just obsess, about what I could fix. So I don't know. Is there another question that I left in that?
No,
like
because
in that answer?
It's interesting because you know what you said. You are capable of obsessing over the same sentence for 3 hours.
Yeah.
With me, it's more of I'm incapable of doing that.
I don't think that's a bad thing.
But I also then reject everything that around it, and I sort of push it into a hole, and I take that very personally. I take that as a personal failure, like, oh, that sucked, hence you are not a good writer. Like at the beginning of the podcast, you spoke about my poetic voice, and I've struggled with calling myself a poet. I still struggle with calling myself a poet because I'm a very narrative writer.
Yeah.
And that's my style, because I am originally a fiction writer. I'm a journalist, I'm a prose writer. Poetry was something I always did as a break from fiction until this project came to me and until this project took over. I never wrote poetry with the intention of building a collection. So it was like one stray poem here and one stray poem there. So to me, the kind of voice that to some poets comes so naturally, even when they're speaking, like cough, cough, Devin, cough, cough. It's just this like natural, like even like last night when he was giving a speech, it's like he's such a poet.
Yeah,
like, it was
is.
so obvious what dead rabbit he was going to pick in that contest because he's a poet.
He speaks in dulcet tones.
Yeah, it's gorgeous, and it's also infuriatingly like amusing. And I love that. And I always struggled with not having that myself until now. At least with poetry, which happened because of a great workshop I took with the poet Vincent Toro, is that, I'm allowing my poetry to be intentional and, considered and thought of, without that necessary natural voice coming in. And I'm trying to like marry my form with my message and like be very, even like mathematical, like be a math scientist about the process.
So do you feel a measure of guilt about that?
Not necessarily. I just take it as a personal slight when I can't figure something out, because I am, this is why I've never written a novel or even come close to writing one. I am a very first draft writer. To me,
and then do you feel like overwhelmed? Like it's like there's so much that you feel like shit about that you're just overwhelmed.
So I feel like for me, the revision process and editing process is about perfecting, yes.
Yeah.
But if the magic is not there in the first draft, I refuse to even consider it. So
I feel two ways about that, because I can say the same thing, but I might feel like that about things I've written countless things that I've just abandoned because I felt that way. But at the same time, maybe there's a feeling you're trying to capture that's actually never going to be there. Because I've never written a first draft that I was like, oh yeah, this is fire. Like, just this, if I just do this, this, and this, like, it's good, Even if I feel like that, I give it to someone else and they tell me, they set me straight. You know what I mean? They're like, dude, what the fuck?
Must be nice living with a writer.
You think you're fucking James Baldwin? Like, who the fuck are you? I can't write I can't write a grammatically correct sentence half the time, like when I'm drafting, because my head is buzzing so much. You know what I mean? Yeah. I think there might be an aspect of you need to allow yourself to have fun when you revisit it the second time, because there is a feeling that I get when I read a first draft that it's not like. So basically, when I approach a draft now, like when I was younger, it was overwhelming because I was like, oh man, because like I'm trying to get something published, and like that goes back to my mantra of like don't think you're gonna finish this tomorrow. But now when I approach like a first draft, it feels like, oh, this is gonna be so fun. Now I'm gonna get to turn it from something that's not that good. Now I get to see what I get to do with it. You know what I mean? And so like maybe some of that is missing from that feeling. Like some of that feeling is missing when you approach a first draft. It's like it's all like I expect it to be here, but it's like so far down here. While as like for me, like maybe it's because I've been writing fiction so much longer than you, or like maybe not longer, but so much more than you, you know. And like because if I started writing poetry, I'd probably have the same feeling as you. It'd be overwhelming. It'd be like, this is so bad. Like, I don't even know how to make this good. Like, whatever, Yeah. But yeah, now when I approach something that I've written, like, I can already feel the short story that I'm drafting. I can feel how shitty it is, But I'm excited about where it's going to go. I'm excited about the possibilities. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I don't think I can speak that feeling into you, But at the same time, like maybe me saying that will spark like you going down the path to like getting that feeling, you know what I mean? Because like I think a lot of writers feel that way. They just get so dejected by what they put on the page, and it's this irrational thought that like you're gonna write something brilliant right away, and like maybe especially if you've been working in another form, not even in writing, like as an athlete when I was younger, I was just so naturally good that maybe when I started writing, there was this expectation that I was going to be an all-star. And I felt like that when I started writing. I had this bravado. And then everyone told me how much I sucked. And I was like, oh, fuck, I feel like shit right now, you know? And it took me a while to kind of like build myself back up and like be like, okay, I got to keep working on it, you know? So it's not just within the draft. It's like in all areas. Like, what else are you good at? That like you have that expectation that you're just going to do it and it's going to be great, you know? But like looking at it now, it's like, okay, I wrote this draft. I don't care how good it is right now. Do I care about this project? Is there something that I'm trying to say here? Like those are the questions that I ask myself now. It's like, what am I trying to do here? That will tell you more whether it's worth pursuing than like, is it good right now?
Yeah.
You know, in a vacuum. Like, would someone read this right now? Like, it's like, another way to put it, not just like having fun with like revising it, but go back to that question of why am I writing this? You know, and it's like, do you still get excited about that? You know?
Yeah.
I don't know. I just said a lot of words about that.
No, I see that.
I think it's time for you to read. I just went on a fucking excited rant about the process. I got way too jacked up right there.
I'm glad I got you there.
I'm like ready to start writing.
Okay, so all right. So I'm gonna read poems I've never read.
Ooh.
So that it doesn't feel like stale to me, and it doesn't feel stale to the world at large.
I've heard a lot of writers say that. Like when a book comes out for them, they're like, you know what? I'm sick of reading this, so fuck it. You guys are getting this tonight. You know? Yeah.
And it's beautiful with a novel because, like, you know, everything is prose, so you can shift your way around.
Yeah.
With poems, like some poems read well, some poems don't. Some poems look good on paper.
That's
only.
true. And to another point, I would say that the novel's hard because like context. Like if you just drop if you just drop in somewhere, someone's like, where the fuck am I? I feel like I'm in a fucking like Kubrick movie, except I fast forwarded the first 35 minutes.
Yeah,
like, you know?
like, is the first half of the movie missing? Okay, so this poem is titled Turf. I mean, the context is in the poem, but just for the sake. So Bombay local trains are infamous. You should Google images of Bombay local trains during rush hour because they are murderous. So to make things easier, but not really, you have specific compartments that are allocated to women only. You know, because they're so crowded that there's no way. It's practically just it's unimaginable to have to like fight a bunch of men and try to get into their compartment and then get like feel all of your parts of your body being touched. So certain compartments are allocated to women only, and I've spent a good amount of my adult life traveling in them, and there's a certain space about that. So This is a poem about that. It's called Turf. It's Mumbai circa 21st century. The ladies' compartment of the local train at rush hour is a battleground. The trains don't even have to stop for us to jump into the open door carriages because we're that skilled an army. The women at the front are the cavalry, and if we don't charge fast enough, we run the risk of toppling our reserves. That is how we look out for each other. We offer pregnant women seats, touch their gravid bellies like seers looking for any sign of life in crystal balls. The train hauls over loudly, but not loud enough to drown our singing. Of course we sing on our way to a fight. That is another way we look out for each other, by keeping spirits up, sharing morning stories of incapable husbands and children born to become cogs in the wheels of the trains that keep us battling. We've never known the waters, the breeze that comes off of them, the very red of wine that is best had smelling the sea salt. We blush by lusting over strange men on billboards. We exchange photos and videos and dreams in the safe of the engine siren like contraband. Before we were here in these carriages, before these trains and tracks were here, the city was one big forest by the sea. This is why we lose ourselves in the woods of sharing, why we nourish ourselves with 5 rupee knickknacks from the hawker in the train, buy scrunchies, earrings, garish loopy chokers only to toss them into the pits of our carry bags, so we can discover them after many days of nonstop war and remember the faint touch of nomadic friendships. Amma says that there comes a time every woman loses her will for combat. We too step out of our bodies, watch ourselves elbow, push, and jostle each other for space. Bicker over who stepped on whom and who dragged whom, and much like all soldiers, beaten and haggard, we start to fall by taking each other down. We become friends in treachery, and for a short moment are this close to giving each other up. When someone says something casual, a wisecrack, or a particularly operatic movie dialogue to ease the tension, and we fall for it and each other hard. I ask myself if the bodies of women are made to bear such beating. But then someone reminds me that the state has always found a way to push down on all of us. And women have only just learned to be considered a battalion, a squad, a troop, or whatever it is they're calling themselves for the revolution of the day.
Wow. Yeah, let's do one more. Have you fallen into the friendship of treachery?
Yeah, like the kind of fights you see in the women's compartment of a local train is bestial. Like, I've seen women pull each other's hair.
That's fucking crazy.
And because they're like, and there's no space, and it's awful. And I feel bad for all of them, even the one who like drops the first punch. Like, she doesn't
to
know
be
any
driven
better.
to that point. Yeah.
She doesn't know any better.
Yeah.
We don't know any better. This one's titled "I Buy Mangoes to Lunch," which was published in an issue of Lumina that you were also published in.
Ooh.
So exciting. I buy mangoes to lunch, to snack, to dinner. I take my great nation's fruit and let it flood me with sweetness. Now, when the world changes wings, when days are longer and fuller of stuffed heat, touch glass, tree, bark, door, knob, and person, and get burnt kind of heat. Hot, like mother, dousing my body with iced buttermilk, that I use to swallow fruitfuls of mango, feed myself into a plant. I nurture and sprout. Mango-flavored heat boils, but I persist. Scoop out spoonfuls of creamy apus from its arched bed. Suck life from the bunginpelli, the dasheri, the langra. Squeeze their hearts of all their juices. Leave behind parched seeds, like the kissing boys who began to eat the mango of my tongue. So for love I stopped kissing, saved all my thirst for a fruit, shaped like a season's cycle, the rich yellow of summer afternoons, the golden wounds shutting my eyes to the blinding sun, all reminders of a sickly sweet childhood. When the other grandchildren and I had amama in our trap, needling our mangoes with tender, crooked, time-pressed fingers, to feel their ripeness, to tell us which fruit is ready to be eaten, like an old-timey general pausing a hot minute before charging us to attack. So we crowd around her, year after year, in a time-honored tradition of growing children and aging grandmother and the muchness of fruit. But sometimes, Amama looks frozen at something else entirely. Inspecting fruit and fullness, she looks into the eyes of me, a woman among boys, scanning for the hunger robustly swelling into a body of tightness and loops, of flesh and fiber, capable of so much sugar and so much hurting. How this body had begun to yearn, without my learning to hide plainly in sight. This Amama watches, as she goads my fruit, all of my unmitigated desire for everything, while I gulp down her stare, tell her to make it quick, tell her using all of me and my craving, I'm ready, I'm ready, I'm ready. Thank you.
Amazing.
Thank you.
It's very interesting. The two poems you just chose, they're very they feel like almost under the microscope, like, you know, not moments, like especially that second one wasn't a moment by a long shot, but like in terms of subject, you know, while as a lot of your poems are very big, you know, Would you agree with that? Like the scope of them can be very big.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed hearing those. That was kind of like that was a little bit of a different side of you.
I think they're softer.
They are soft. Yeah, they were a little softer, especially that second one,
Yeah. I'm trying also, I think, as a political person and as just even a writer, that not everything has to be a grandstanding, narrative. The second poem especially is so important to me because the mango is like the Indian mango. So I named some of the kinds of mango in there that you get in India, which is, not to take away from my Latinx, family people, friends. But if you've not had an Indian mango, we've not had a mango.
Yeah.
No. It is just the greatest tasting thing in the world. And within that spectrum, there are different tasting mangoes. And one of my first ever awful periods happened after eating a mango. So in many ways, and then I quit eating mangoes.
It's very biblical.
Yeah, I quit eating mangoes for an entire summer.
You did what? You thought it was like cause and effect or something?
Yeah, because I associated that really painful period and that the way my family also received and that period or the puberty, coming of age, as like a very symbolic thing to ripeness of the fruit. And mangoes, if you eat a lot of mangoes, they give you pimples. It can prepone your periods. Like you hear all of these things. And to me, just the idea of, the lust for a fruit versus, but especially women's body learning to show desire before they understand what desire is.
Yeah.
The swelling of breast, the swelling of the body.
Yeah. And that's what a lot of your poems are the experience of women.
Yeah.
But there was a touch of personal experience more so than in some of your other poems that can be a little more, not just political, but for a and not just for a cause, but for a population,
for a
demographic, So that was really cool to hear. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you so
much.
much.
That was awesome. Okay.
Are you going to read?
I'm not going to read, no. I'm going to close it down.
Okay.
Yeah. The people will call if they want me.
The people will come calling.
They will come calling.
They know where to buy your book.
They know where to buy my book.
Emerald City.
Okay, that's it for today's episode. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and review on whichever platform you're listening. You can get in touch with us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Animal Riot Press or through our website, animalriotpress.com. This has been the 34th episode of the Animal Riot Podcast with your host, Brian Birnbaum, and the wonderful, brilliant Manda. Our transcripts for our deaf and hard of hearing animals are provided by Jonathan Kay. This episode was cut by our podcast assistant, Dylan Thomas, and we are produced by me, Katie Rainey. See you later, you filthy animals.
Yes sir, it's the burn. Bombing on y'all and getting gully as the fern.